The fog thickened over the River Elm, heavy and cold, like an ancient dream clinging to reality. A chill seeped into the bones, and the old ferryman, Thomas, felt his fingers grow stiff on the wooden oar. Each evening, he steered his boat to the other bank, a silent routine, a lifelong journey. In his deeply wrinkled eyes, there was a sadness that seemed even more profound than the depths of the River Elm itself. People whispered that he had become part of the river. So old, so mysterious. Thomas's life had flowed on this river, in this very silence, for years. No one knew what lay behind his solitude. He never spoke to anyone, save for a slight nod when the coins for the fare clinked. His silence, though, it was a heavy burden, a transgression, or a grave moral lapse he had committed on some forgotten evening in his youth, a secret known only to him. With every passenger he ferried across, he felt as though he wasn't just crossing a river, but ferrying his own soul to the other side, hoping that one day he might find forgiveness, or at least release from his burden. Every sigh, every splash of his oar echoed the regret that was etched deep in his eyes. Tonight the evening was darker, more tempestuous than usual. Black clouds roared overhead, and an eerie dread hung in the air. Thomas clutched his old heavy coat tighter, gripping the oars firmly, his eyes searching the water's surface for some invisible truth. This night felt different, and an unusual fear had settled in his heart. Just then, a shadowy figure emerged from the thick fog. It was a tall, slender man whose face was obscured by his hat, and his gait carried a restless urgency. Thomas recognized him. For a fleeting moment, his heart hammered against his ribs. He had never imagined, never thought he would see this man again in his lifetime. It was Ernst, the very Ernst whose life's threads had become irrevocably entangled by one of Thomas's grave misjudgments. There was no anger in Ernst's eyes, only a weary emptiness, an emptiness that made him even more unnerving. To the other side, Ernst's voice, barely audible above the rumble of thunder, cut through the air. His tone carried a chill that pierced Thomas's heart. Thomas nodded, his fingers tightening on the oar. The words, "to the other side," echoed in his mind. His lifelong yearning to ferry his own soul to the other side now stood before him, a stark, terrifying reality. The boat swayed precariously on the rough waves. The silence between them was so profound that only the rhythmic creak of the oars and the whisper of the wind could be heard. This silence was a heavy wall, one that Thomas himself had erected decades ago. Ernst stood, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the river's darkness. Thomas glanced at him repeatedly, his lips parting, as if to speak, to confess his sin, to beg for forgiveness, or perhaps just to explain that he too had been tormented by this very regret for years. But the words eluded him. His tongue was tied. Shadows of the past danced before his eyes. A young Thomas in a desperate situation, driven by self-preservation, compelled to give false testimony against Ernst, or to conceal a crucial truth. That single decision had irrevocably altered Ernst's fate, consigning him to ignominy, poverty, and isolation. Thomas had believed then that it was a minor transgression, nothing that would cause significant harm. But he had soon learned that crime wasn't always grand. Sometimes a small silence could devastate lives. This was the very silence that had been consuming Thomas for decades. After that, he had left the city, becoming a ferryman on this river, attempting to wash away his life in its flowing currents. As the boat reached the middle of the river, the storm intensified. The clouds roared louder, and lightning tore through the sky. The waves tossed the boat violently. Thomas gripped the oars with all his might, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A sharp pain shot through his chest. His heart pounded frantically, a pain that had been tightly bound to his soul for years as regret. His gaze fell upon Ernst, who remained silently standing. "Ernst," Thomas whispered, his voice so faint it was perhaps lost in the roar of the wind. Ernst showed no reaction. His eyes were still fixed on the water. Thomas tried again, his grip on the oars loosening. I'm sorry." Tears welled up in his eyes. In his final moments, he was desperately trying to reveal his truth, yearning for that one opportunity he had never found. But words had abandoned him. His breaths grew shallow. Ernst felt the boat lurch and the oars fall into the water. He looked at the ferryman. Thomas's eyes were open, filled with profound regret, an untold story, and a final plea. His hand slowly lifted and then fell. Ernst quickly moved to him, recognizing the gravity of the situation. He stared at Thomas's face. He saw the shattered fragments of his own life reflected in Thomas's eyes, and the pain that Thomas had silently endured for years. Ernst realized, without needing to be told, that this old ferryman was the very man who had once turned his life into a living hell. For a moment, hatred flickered across his face, only to be replaced by a strange emptiness. Thomas's body went limp, the light in his eyes dimming. His last breath escaped his lips. He fell silent forever, his confession frozen in his eyes. Ernst looked at Thomas's lifeless face. The man from whom he had sought revenge, or at least answers, was now silent. Ernst felt no triumph. All the bitterness and sorrow of his life lay before him in the form of a silent corpse. He gently closed Thomas's eyes. The storm still raged, and the boat was at the mercy of the river. Ernst picked up the oars and began rowing in an unknown direction. He knew he would never receive a verbal confession. He would never know why Thomas had done what he did. But what he had seen in Thomas's eyes was more than 1,000 words. A silent confession laden with regret, offered at the brink of death. At that moment, Ernst realized that the years he had spent seeking revenge or explanation were futile. The ferryman's life, his solitude, and his silence had been his greatest punishment. Forgiveness, he understood, comes to a person when they accept their sin, even if their words are never uttered. The ferryman's life offered him a profound spiritual lesson. The journey of the soul is less about forgiveness from others and more about truth and self-acceptance. It is not just about what you did, but also about how you carried the burden of it. Ernst turned the boat towards a shore, but not the one he had originally intended. He was now heading towards a shore where he might find peace for his own soul. The river was no longer just water to him, but a flowing philosophy of life, where every wave told a story, and every silence held a deep confession.